722422000 is our number. It's a bit like Groundhog Day. I'm going back 13 years, 12 years. I don't know, however, to talk to my next guest. Today is World Down Syndrome Day, an annual celebration where people with the genetic disorder are celebrated for their excellence and achievements. In fact, one of the key themes this year is equality. Thousands of people with Downs are sharing their life stories on Twitter to show the world how much of a normal life they actually live. Joining me in the studio to discuss is Steve Palmer, author of Downs with Kids. He's also the father of 15-year-old Stan, who has Down syndrome. And I can put this away now and actually just talk to you. You used to work here at BBC Radio London, and probably the first person to bring this really and truly to my attention because of your boy.
Yeah, well, Stan was born when I was working here, so January 2002. I was doing the thing that the people are out there and pressing all the buttons at the moment are doing. So so it's always weird speaking to you, and even though you've moved offices, it's weird to sort of see people I knew at the time, many of whom supported me because Stan was born, and we didn't really know what the future would hold.
So it was the first and only time that you'd ever spoken to me on air. I joined the station in October of 2002, okay. And then that feature came out about more people terminating than having the baby, and then you and I went for it. And I want to go back there. When you found out as a family that your baby was going to be with Downs, your baby was going to be Downs, was there ever a moment where you thought, we're not going to have this baby?
No, we found out on the day he was born, and other people find out before, and increasingly people find out before. But so that's why I always say that when someone receives a diagnosis of Down syndrome, so that's really important to make that point. So we found out on the day, and I was saying to your researcher earlier on the phone, it was ridiculous. I spent the first 24 hours thinking he wouldn't make it through the night. This was based on no medical evidence whatsoever, but nobody in the hospital, unfortunately, was prepared to, that saw us at that time, was prepared to disavow us of that. And actually, here he is 15 years later.
Yeah, but I suppose the question I'm asking, as you well know, is you must have, at least in the early stages, thought, if we had known, what would we have done?
Well, luckily I didn't have that. I didn't have that choice to make, and actually I'm really pleased I didn't have that choice to make, because if I'd had that choice, I don't know what I would have done.
Right, well that's
because that's a discussion and a conversation and thoughts I would have to have, and I never had to have that. And I do feel very sorry for people who find out before, who might not be getting the right sort of information that's coming their way. So that, these days there's people on Twitter. So why would you not want someone around, being on Twitter doing the equality messages that are being spelled out today by people with Down syndrome?
But you don't know that you can do it until you do it, quite often, is what people say to me, because it is a different kind of challenge, isn't it?
Well, some people, and the other thing to say is some people say, you get on a plane to Italy and you end up in France. Well, I like to say we got on a plane to Italy and we crash landed like that first scene in the first episode of Lost, and
remember it well,
and the aeroplane engines are whizzing around.
You didn't get dragged in then like that person did, did you?
Yeah, not dragged in. Well, I didn't. Who's the main character? Is it Jack? Yeah, he's walking around all dazed for about 30 seconds, and then he gets on with it. He's got to get on with it. And I see a parallel in my life, really, and that it's not that sort of trite thing whereby, it's just a different experience. Actually, it can be difficult. I'm quite tired today because Stan was not very, didn't go to bed very early last night, got up very early this morning. It's lighter at the moment. That's one of the things he can do. There are challenges. Life can be difficult. Sometimes you feel incredibly sorry for yourself. But most of the rest of the time, he's brought things to our life that are just incredible.
Well, all children do, don't they? And is it like, in terms of the challenge, in terms of how other people pressurize you to deal with him in a certain way or deal with him, tell me about that. Do people talk to you instead of talking to him? Tell me about that.
Yeah, there was an incident recently in a swimming pool where it really got out of hand, and someone said that Stan was frightening their children because he's big, and he was walking up to them. And actually, I got the swimming pool people involved, and it was really quite nasty and naughty what she was doing, and actually they told her that if she didn't like it, she'd have to get out of the pool. But usually,
do you understand why people fear what they don't properly understand?
Well, they're making a judgment on it on the basis of one moment in time, and actually she ended up apologising to him, and I made my way back to the back of the pool and let her do it and speak to him personally, because I thought that was important for her to say that to him, not me. Most of the time, though, I was going to go on to say it's the lazy stuff, isn't it? It's the staring or not quite understanding what's going on. You know, we went to the cinema recently as a family, and I felt like he only really became disabled again when the house lights came up. You know, because we're then back on show, aren't we, as a family?
Are you like lots of parents that I speak to with children with challenges who wonder about the day when you will not be around to protect them anymore?
Of course I do. And I think it's on everyone's mind. But you see, because that's a very real issue. But there's also the fact that I've got to be home by 6:30 and I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And there's all the daily stuff that you've got to do as well. And, you know, one of the cliches people come out with when, you know, your child is born, and also Stan had heart surgery when he was 3 months old. So that was actually much more shocking than he was born with a disability. One of the things people say is, oh, you know, life's a roller coaster, take every day, day by day. And now you've just said to me, well, what about the future? So, you know, what do you think about? What's the priority? I can tell you it's all on my mind.
Yeah, of course it is. And I mean, much of this would be on the mind for any parent, whether their child have challenges extra or not, wouldn't
Of course. I mean, the main point, I mean, Stan's got a brother who's 18 years old, and I love them both the same. And you know, I want to say that. I often feel like I'm always on the radio talking about Stan, and I want to talk about his brother and say, you know, I love him the same. The issue is that, you know,
one needs more help.
Yeah, one needs more help, but they are the same, whereas some people might not think that, you know.
In terms, then, of even our conversation today, might we spend some time talking about what he can do as opposed to what he can't do? What other sorts of what is the hope? What's your when you're at your most optimistic? What's your hope that he will be able to achieve?
Well, a bunch of people in America have just made a video saying don't describe it as special needs. We don't think it's called special needs, and it's their decision to make that video. And I like to think the idea that Stan would be able to differentiate between what he thinks is right and what he thinks is wrong. So, but at the moment, he's not particularly brilliant at reading and writing compared to some of his peers. So sometimes people say, where is he on the spectrum? There isn't really a spectrum. He might be good at this and bad at that.
So can he read? If I gave him a newspaper, if I gave him something to read, could he read?
He's starting to with support. But whereas some of his friends who are the same age as him can, but they're perhaps not so sociable. So what I'd say to that is there was a Barnet, we live in Barnet, it was a Barnet Schools dance festival recently, and guess who was at the front, you know, flexing his muscles and doing the whole thing. It was my Stan, because he's very, very sociable. I mean, he'd have no problem just standing up in front of a crowd of 2,000 people. Some of his peers might have a problem with that, and they may be able to read, and that's what you get. You get what you get, and I suppose we're just used to that.
What is it that you hope? Because you make the point that you're down on my sheet as being part of a support group, and of course he's 17 now. You don't need to be part of that group in the same way or head it up. What is it that you hope people will take from a day like today, and that they might think about in regards to people with Down syndrome?
I think it's taking things on a stage, whereas in the past people used to think, oh, well, they get a job and drive a car and a flat, and that's fine. And all those things are definitely possible. But also, I'm looking to a day when people with Down syndrome and other learning disabilities, their voice is heard, their own voice. You know, I often think, well, I'm quite a political activist when it comes to disability. And I've been thinking recently, maybe I should take a back seat. Maybe I should be the supporter, the advocate for people who want to say what they really care about. I mean, I know a young woman who works for a user-led organisation in Lambeth called People First Lambeth, and she describes herself as having a learning difficulty. And you might say, well, what's the difference between a disability and a difficulty? But for her, it's really important that she says it's a difficulty, because for her, that's the language she wants to use, and she's very clear about that. So when people are expressing themselves and they have a learning disability, yes, with support, that's the sort of thing that's really exciting, isn't it? Because it means that the people are actually saying what they really mean and really want out of life.
Yesterday we talked about autism. There's going to be an autistic character in Sesame Street, and we talked a lot about that, about major storylines, and Autism is regarded quite often, Steve, as the invisible disability. Therefore, I might go somewhere with my child, nobody would know, and it just look like I'm a bad parent. It would seem to me that your challenge is exactly the opposite, where I have almost a lower, if any, expectation of your child based upon the fact that your child looks as though he has a challenge.
Yeah, and so you can be judged immediately. Yeah,
but what do I do then? I'd like to approach you. I'd like to talk to you, but I'm with my child. My child's never seen somebody with Down syndrome. My child is staring. What do? I don't want to embarrass you. I don't want to embarrass myself. What do I do?
Often it's the young children themselves that are the really great ones. They'll walk up and say, "What's up with him?" And then, you start this really honest conversation.
Well, you will, but as a parent, I'd like to find a hole that I would like to dig, Steve, if my child did that.
I know. But I'd much prefer that.
Really?
Because then we could say to a younger generation, look, I mean, Stan's brother and his cousins, they were in the same primary school as him. They're amongst a generation of people that have gone to school with people with disabilities.
Has that been a good thing then, putting everybody in the same classroom?
Good thing, but for those who haven't gone to school with disabilities, and it might happen in some schools that won't accept people with learning disabilities, I think they're all the poorer for it. I always say, Stanley does Macatong signing. By the time he left his school, which is Holly Park School in Barnet, by the time he left, the whole school was signing Good Morning in Macatong. And that's a massive legacy that he left at that school.
It's fantastic, isn't it? So what do we take away from a day like today? I'd love to hear from you as a parent of a child with Down syndrome. Well, child, he's a young man now. Your journey through, I imagine, changing conditions, changing attitudes, and they're always changing. What might we take away, other people, from today?
Do you remember the Paralympics?
Yes, I do.
And it was like we were walking around going, whoa, this is us. We've got our moment in the sun. Isn't it great? And I predicted that, 10 days later it would go back to the way it was.
And it did.
It probably did, but then it nudged forward. It's like one step forward, 10 steps back, or whatever. So for a day like today, it's like that. But what's really important is the voice of people with learning disabilities is heard, and it's heard loudly.
It's a pleasure speaking to you again.
Thanks, Eddie.
If not for the fact that you've just told me your child that we talked about, that baby in arms, is now 17 years old.
15 years old.
15 years old. Sorry, that makes you old and that makes me very old, right?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'm 30. I was a child when I started here on BBC Radio London. Steve, it's a pleasure to see you. Give my love to the boy, yes? Thanks so much. 020 722 42,000. There you go. That's the way to have a conversation, isn't it? And if you'd like to, I'd like to have it with you. In terms of today being World Down Syndrome Day, are you the parent of a Down syndrome child? Would you like to talk about what your child can do, how perhaps he or she is treated, what you've learned, and the message that you would like on this day to give other parents listening? The number 020 722 42,000. You can text 81333 and start your message with the word London.